the episode. Hello, you wonderful UXers. Welcome back to another episode of The Industry of UX. I'm your host, Filippo Lovotti. So back on episode 3, we had Morgane Peng on the show to discuss her Medium article, 11 Realities on Finding Your First Job. During that episode, we ended up talking about a couple of other topics too, so we were able to cover only the first 2 out of the 11 realities. But as promised, we brought Morgane back to talk about the remaining realities, and this time, we only kept our conversation tight around that. So if you're asking, what are the remaining job realities? Keep listening. There is a lot to learn today. In fact, you're probably going to be a better job candidate after listening to this episode. And this is because Morgane covers points such as how some channels work better than others when applying for jobs, how you should not fake it, how hard skills can actually be in the way, and why all details matter. By the way, Morgane has some other great Medium articles, so go check them out. And all the links are going to be on the episode page of our website, theindustryux.com. Let me know what you think about the episode by tweeting at IndustryUX. One last thing. If you have an iPhone, open the Apple Podcasts app and give us a 5-star rating and a review. It helps us produce a better show and bring the podcast to a bigger audience. Okay, on to the conversation with Morgane. So we covered a couple of points last time we talked. Now let's see if we can cover the remaining points. And we have ways to go. So we're going to try and squeeze everything in. Starting at point number 3. You mentioned that some channels work better than others with different gatekeepers.
Oh, yes. I think that was my experience. I don't know for you, but when I was first job hunting and until very recently, you kind of feel like the company is like one person with the same view and the same behavior. It's like this kind of one thing where in reality, there's like multiple people involved with different sensibilities. This is why I mentioned that we're trying to lower bias by having 2 volunteer screening because everyone's different. I guess that's the beauty of as well being different, right? And you're going to split the work. So depending on the channel, you will be facing different people. You may be facing a recruiter. You may be facing someone directly from the team, or you may be facing directly the head of design, let's say. So in order to, I would say, optimize the people you'll be talking to, usually what I recommend is if the design team has a website anywhere, like a channel online, try to reach through that first because you will bypass all the middlemen somehow. If not, try to look at whether you can reach out to the company. And usually, I mean, I don't know if it's like this for every big organization, but all the job boards, like the LinkedIn ads, usually they get published with a delay because you have to go through all the processes. I'm glad you said yes, so we're not the only one. You have to get it approved by multiple people responsible for multiple things. And so, for example, for us, it's not uncommon that maybe there's like a 2-week delay in publishing the ad on the other channels. So that's why if there's like a primary channel, go for this one because you'll be first and you may be talking directly to the people who will select you.
Absolutely. Totally agree. And in my experience, the first ones that know that they're going to be hiring someone are the hiring managers and the people on a particular team. So they are going to be the ones that are going to analyze the work that's being given to them, understand that there is not enough bandwidth as it is, and then ask for more designers and then open the job rec and then go from there. So they are the first ones that know that there's going to be a job available in this particular team at this particular company. Then once the job is, the rec is approved and HR has gone through the appropriate channels and you have the job description and all of that, then it's going to appear first on the website, right?
The company website, yes.
Mm-hmm. So whatever the company, all those places where the company can just push it without having to have that delay that you mentioned. And then lastly, you're going to see it on LinkedIn, on Indeed, Monster.com, other websites of that sort. Knowing this, how would you recommend people change their strategy when it comes to applying for jobs?
So maybe one precision regarding to LinkedIn, the LinkedIn job space is different to the rest of LinkedIn because obviously, and that's probably my advice here, if you know someone or you follow someone directly from the design team, they will probably at some point post a message saying that they're looking for people. And that's how you know it first, whether it's from LinkedIn, like in your newsfeed or from Twitter. There's higher chances, or even like colleagues or design peers, they will probably say, hey, we're looking for someone to join the team. That's how you can know it first. And that sounds really much more like networking. I know these horrible terms. I guess networking is really being able to kind of get those signals early so you can be first in the know and be first to apply.
Yeah. Number 4, hard skills are overrated. Now, why are they overrated?
So as designers, we love to talk about emotion, emotional design, human factors, stuff like that. Yet, for some reason, when we go through the interview process, we kind of forget that there's like humans in front of us who will maybe become our colleagues. So a lot of, especially the junior applicants, they focus on knowing the latest tools, like all the methodology frameworks, all the steps and names and stuff like that. And really, what sometimes they don't know is the interview really, okay, we're trying to assess do they have like the minimum design skills that we're looking
Right.
for? But what's the experience of working with them, the candidates? And in the experience, there's maybe, okay, there's the hard skill. Okay, are they able to use a design software, for example? Are they able to do, I don't know, to run a script for usability testing? But a lot of the experience working with someone is the soft skills, like how do they behave? Is that someone who seems to like what they're doing?
Yeah.
Are you looking forward to, say hi in the morning? And that's the soft skills. And I find that people, they rarely train on the soft skills because they just feel that, oh, they just take me as I am. Whereas, yeah, that's true. And I remember I have a candidate and he was like, oh, okay, I'll do the interview and I'll come in wearing jeans. And if they allow me to wear jeans, that means I'm okay to work with them. And that can be a fair, criteria. But when he told me that, I was like, that's so sad because maybe you have met someone who's a bit stricter on that, that's not representative of the team. And that specific person doesn't like, people who show up wearing jeans because they feel like it's less serious.
Yeah.
And you who have missed out on the work, just on the job, just for that. So yeah, I would say soft skills, they're like hard skills. They have to be kind of prepared, and you have to know, for example, what's important to you. For example, if I ask a candidate, what do you value? Okay, one question I love to ask, and I was wondering whether I should reveal that in this podcast, is my, but it's fine. It will be a bonus point for people who listen to this episode. One of my favorite questions to ask is, when's the last time you changed your mind about something? And not, what I'm going to have for dinner or lunch. It's like on really something. And the reason I'm asking this is, can the person have some kind of introspection and change their mind? Because like design is changing. When you design, you have to change your mind constantly.
Yes.
Because, you realize maybe what you design, people, they don't understand, or maybe that was not the right direction to go. And so I love this question. But the amount of people, they just caught off guard and they freeze. And yeah, I think that's part of the things you have to train as well.
I think that's a great point. And so what you just mentioned, I think surfaces a problem that I've seen, especially with less experienced applicants, where it's almost like they don't want to admit or they don't want to cover anything that could make them be seen as vulnerable, or they made a mistake, or even answering the question, when was the last time you changed your mind about something? I can see how it could make some of them nervous because they have to admit that they were maybe wrong at some point, or they had a different opinion, and then they realize that based on something. And that's the other cool thing. also understanding how they change their mind is actually very
Yeah.
important. I think that's amazing as well. So your question is super amazing, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I think I had once someone who said, I don't recall changing my mind. I was like, what? It's not possible.
With that said, number 5, pause, but be mindful of cultural differences.
Yes.
It sounds like an interesting one.
I'm trying to pause here. So, well, yeah. So you see, that's all those little terms that you try to add when you're like, oh my God, it's my turn to speak. Quick, let me find something to say. Well, during the interview, that is super obvious. And I remember I've seen candidates, they were talking so fast and so much that I couldn't add any question. They were just like, they were on play on and they were just like probably preparing too much, but like explaining their life, why they've choose UX. But like I wanted to ask questions, but there was no way for me to jump in or even give my point of view. It was just like almost like if I was listening to a podcast, honestly, podcast of their interview. And posing is so important because first, that means you give the other person some opportunities to ask questions or follow up. Also, maybe you've said something that someone will find super interesting. So they will want to follow up. So that's in itself is important to pose. But also, when, for example, you ask a question and you pause just to think about it, that also reveals that you can think about something and not just jump to the whatever comes to mind first. And on the cultural differences, it's very funny because in the team we have different nationalities. We have people from France, from the UK, from South Korea, from China, originally from Poland. And I realized quite early on, especially I think when I first started working in the UK, that the kind of standards are a bit different. So I don't know if people have noticed, or I don't know, people from, I guess, English speaking countries sometimes feel that French people are not polite because we like to cut people. Well, the reason why we cut, because in French it's completely okay. And there's been studies, so they're so interesting, that when you run a conversation in French, the length, the pause length between each person is like I think very, very small. I mean, smaller than in English speaking countries, which means if I cut you in French, it won't be, I guess it won't be impolite. But if I do it in English, that will be, because the standard is a bit different.
Yeah. I like how you actually quantify that in your article, saying that the French has shorter pauses. Normally they are 0.3 of a second, and English normally has longer pauses with 0.5 of a second. So moving on, number 6, and this is a huge one. Don't fake it. I think it's self-explanatory, but I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yes. You know how sometimes you hear friends doing, and they're like bragging how they've been asked a question. And for example, they asked me if I can use Figma, and I said yes. And then I got the job. That to me kind of sends the wrong narrative, because honestly, whether you can use a tool is probably not the reason why you've been hired first. But for some reason, people, they like to feel that they've been smarter, or like they dupe some, like the process, or they game the process. And sometimes, honestly, and especially like when you're hiring for a specific role, I would say it's just not worth it, because if you realize that the person's been lying to you or like being dishonest, honestly, you'll be thinking, can I really trust this person? Doesn't mean that when we will trust the person with a project, doesn't mean that they will conceal what's happening, and then it will be too late when, they will need help. So that is again, there's the narrative. Oh yeah, I gamed the interview. They asked me something and I totally, I totally own the discussion. But in reality, I think it's a very dangerous thing to do, especially, and I realized that way later when I was reflecting on my own interviews, sometimes pushing you to the limits is part of what we're trying to do, just to see if at some point you will be clear and explicit on the things you know and the things you don't know. And in UX, it's so important as well.
Yes, absolutely. Not only that, but sometimes what I've seen happen is that people make up stuff and or they overstretch. Maybe they worked as a UX designer for 3 years, so they stretch it to 5 or 6 or whatever. Or maybe they overstretch on certain concepts or certain answers, and then they trip on it later on. So they have to recall, we go over a similar question or we go over a similar topic, and now they give you a different answer that is not compatible with the first one. And so as a hiring manager, you're paying attention because you're not nervous. You're not the one that is nervous about the, that is nervous in the moment. And so the candidate being the more nervous person in the room, if you can't keep track of the lies or the misrepresentations, you're going to trip at some point, and the hiring managers and people in the room are going to notice that, and that's going to come off as dishonest. So it's better to say that you don't know, or just say the truth, or explain, that maybe that's not an area of expertise, but you're willing to grow. It's much better to say that than to say, "Oh yeah, I know it exactly. I know this thing perfectly. I've done this so many times." And then later on, 10, 15, 30 minutes after that answer, being asked a similar question and forgetting that you said that, and now you went from 5 years of experience to 3 years of experience in the span of 20 minutes with a similar question, and people have noticed, and it's just not. You're right. It comes off as dishonest, and it's just like starting on the wrong foot. Because where does it go from there?
And it's also for the candidates because obviously, usually when you publish a job, there's like specific tasks to do, but you can also tailor it a little bit. And let's say if you say that, I don't know, you manage like teams of people, but you've never done it. And then we've seen that because you said that you've done it. So I'll be like, okay, cool. This person has managerial experience. Okay, I'll trust that person with like those tasks. And then suddenly I realize, or even for them, they won't get the support because for me, they've done it before, so they know how to do it. So if they come back and say, hey, can I have a training on how to manage people? Like it's weird. And yes, as I said, it's not a good start.
Number 7, your questions are part of the interview. They definitely are.
Oh, yes. But that's not something a lot of candidates know. Because obviously we ask questions to the candidates, but we kind of expect the candidate to ask questions back to us. And as usual in UX, it's very important how you ask questions because that kind of gives the flavor of how you will ask questions on your projects or during user testings on user research. And so I think there's like, so for the people who are unaware of this, there's like 2 categories. There's the first category who don't ask any question. And I've actually made that mistake in the past where I was so stressed. And at the end, they were like, do you have any question? I was like, nope. And then very awkward blank. So, and in that moment, because you're like, oh, I don't want to waste their time. I'll just fit in whatever work they want to give to me. In reality, on the other side, they'll be like, oh, that person has no interest in what we're doing because they have no question.
Yep.
So that's the first category. And the second category I've seen are those who kind of have probably a list by their side and they're kind of like reading off a list. And that comes as very disjointed because you've been talking about something and suddenly they're like, oh, okay. Can you like just ask a completely like non-related question?
Right.
And maybe they don't know, but we actually read the same articles online. I mean, the same training articles on Medium. So if that question is word for word, the same thing that I've seen in an article, it's a bit sad because I'll be like, okay, they're clearly not interested in having a discussion. They're just kind of ticking, okay, I need to add questions. So I'm asking the questions I've read somewhere else. And yeah, I'll just say it's very sad because obviously maybe you've been having a great interview so far,
Right.
but because you've been lazing on active listening and there's like maybe no link between your questions and what's been said before, that kind of gives me a doubt of whether you can actually actively listen to someone.
Yes, absolutely. One more thing that I will add, though, is that normally the recommendation that I personally will have is to understand at what point of the interview you are, like what stage of the interview process you are, to understand how to better ask questions at each point. For instance, if you are on the first call with HR and you ask them how the team is set up and how does the work pipeline works and what you'll be working on, that's not probably the best person to ask that question, because HR is mostly, when you are during the screening, they want to understand uh, if you are compatible with the team, if you have compatible skill set. They are basically screening you to move on to the likely the hiring manager or someone in the UX team that knows the practice of UX. And so maybe that question is better for that person, or even after when you get into the weeds a little bit. So at each stage, there are appropriate questions to ask. The other thing is, if you really don't have any questions, and you get at the end of an interview, really don't have any questions, I will normally recommend to say that, hey, the things that I wanted to get out of this, that I really wanted to ask, are these three things. And you just cover these three things very exhaustively. So I don't have any follow ups with those things. Is there anything else that you would like to say, you would like to mention about this job? Or are there any details that I'm not asking you about that you would like to add for me? I think that that will be perfectly fine. Like, you don't have any more questions. You are explaining why you don't have any more questions. And maybe you ask them if there is anything else that they would like for you to know. If you truly have no more questions, I think that that would be better than just sit there and say, no, I don't have any more questions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, maybe like after, I don't know, rounds 3, 5, 4, like a couple of rounds, maybe yes, you know the position, you know the team, and yeah, you're right indeed. Just acknowledging that you've been talking to different people and they've answered your questions previously. That's the trick.
So that everyone knows exactly why you're not asking questions. They know that it's not like you're not curious, is that your curiosity has already been, your thirst for knowledge has already been quenched.
Yeah.
And so, with that said, let's move to number 8. Your follow up emails are also part of the interview. So, now this is an interesting one because, for instance, there are companies out there, I'm not going to name the names, but they discourage the employees from replying to emails from candidates that were not either selected, or they were selected but they were asking for, they moved on but they're asking for feedback. They actually discourage you from replying with the feedback because they say that it could be a legal liability.
Hmm.
So I know that some companies out there, they think that way. But why do you specifically believe that the follow-up emails are also part of the interview?
Follow-up emails, in the way I wrote it in the article, for me was more on the candidate side. What I mean by that is, if you had a good interview session with someone and you have their name or their email, probably you have it in the invitation. It takes a few minutes to say, hey, thank you so much for your time today. I was so interested, blah, blah, blah. Or maybe mention something that you were interested in. Then not sending anything because and I felt that in the past when I was applying, I was like, oh, they must be so busy and seeing so many candidates. I don't want to be, like the teacher's pet and look desperate. But actually, at the end of the day, it's just being polite and, just thanking for the interview. That's it. And then you move on. Now, on the question you ask on whether you should ask for feedback or not, well, there's no harm asking for it. Then indeed, depending on the policy, maybe they will be allowed or not to give a feedback.
Yeah.
I would tend to say if it's someone so usually what we try to do, at least for us, is if it's someone we spend some time with, for us, it's kind of normal that we give feedback, or at least just acknowledge why we maybe went for someone else, or maybe just explain that, for example, recently someone was asking for feedback why we didn't select the person. And I told her, well, actually, we went with someone with a different background to complement the team. And there's nothing, with your skills and your background. I mean, with your background, you were super strong. But like in that moment, we went with someone, again, with a different background. And sometimes we would say that on the design challenge, for example, that compared to the other candidates, maybe they performed a little bit less. So we try at least to explain so that they're not like in the unknown and try to overthink the reason why. But I do understand why sometimes it might be tricky. So especially like in the early stage candidates, because again, if for example we don't screen them, or for example we look at the portfolio is not maybe strong enough, we don't necessarily have the time to do a portfolio analysis. You know what I mean? So, and it's too
Yes.
harsh to say,
Yes.
sorry, your portfolio is not strong enough. So
Exactly.
then, yeah.
Yeah. I personally would love to give feedback if you have made it far enough to where we are the final stages and then something happens or it was just not a good fit after all. And it wasn't necessarily a personality thing, but it was mainly just, as you mentioned, it could be like we need a different background for that position. And it's for those who are listening, those subtleties matter. So it's not because maybe you were not prepared or you didn't have the skill or anything like that. We also look for those subtleties. So just FYI. But getting back to what I was saying, if they make it to that stage, I would love to give them feedback. There are policies in place in certain companies that forbid you from doing that. So I interpreted your point that way, but I understand that the point that you were making in the article was actually just send an email without an expectation of a follow-up. Just thank them that they spent time with you, that you had the opportunity. I think that makes a lot of sense. That absolutely is a good best practice to keep. But understand when it comes to what I brought up about the feedback, it's not always going to be given to you. So that's just the reality of it. But we're going to move on. We have 3 more. We're going to move on to number 9. All details matter.
Oh, yes, those little things, right?
What do you mean with all details matter?
So obviously, you will be interviewing for a specific position. But when you actually get to the interview phase, there's just so much more than you'll be judged on. Obviously, your soft skills, how you listen to do you have active listening skills? A lot of little things. I mean, one by one, it's not a big deal, but like if you kind of make a super combo of it, it kind of really lower your chances of being selected. And again, as I said, one by one, it's not a big thing. Maybe having a messy background, that can happen to everyone, to me, to everyone. But if you combine having a messy background, not being, on time, I don't know, like remembering, that's a good one, not remembering people you've been talking to previously.
Mm.
That's also something I like to ask is like, who have you met so far? And that's also part of like, just say when you don't know, don't pretend. Because if you don't remember the person, you can say, oh, I don't remember the name, but it's the lady who, whatever, did something, or like it's the guy working on that. Sometimes some people would say, oh, no, I don't remember the name. She or he has a super weird name. Don't say that. I know you're being stressed. I know you want to justify why you don't remember someone's name and you think you want to be perfect and you want to, but that's just not something to say. And I feel for those candidates because I know like they want to prove that they're good candidates and they want to justify, but sometimes it's just apologize. Don't justify. Don't justify it. It's like worse than anything.
Just say that you don't remember the name. Yeah, it will be such a better answer. So we have 2 more. 10, having too much experience can work against you. So this is the one that I wanted to ask you exactly more information, more details about, because I feel that I've been in this position where I got a lot of experience at one point when I was applying and I was turned away because of that.
I think now I can see both sides of the equation. So obviously, when you apply, you'll be like, I can do so much, and I've proven that I've done that before. So why aren't they considering me? On the other side of the table, now that I have to consider that as well. My thinking is a bit different because I'll be more like, would that person get bored because they've done it already?
Yeah.
And would they start asking for more things? I mean, I need someone for that specific job. And if after 2 months they're already bored or they want to do something else, I mean, I'd rather work with someone who has less experience but have this can-do attitude and wants to do it. I mean, really want to get their hands dirty on something, rather than having someone who maybe will get super bored and leave us after 5 months. I hope that makes sense.
It makes total sense. That's exactly the way I would look at it. If, for instance, if I have say a mid-level designer position open, so that's anywhere between 2 years of experience to, I don't know, 5 years of experience, depending on how that worked, how that worked out in your background. But then I see someone that has 10 years of experience applying for this position. That feels way overqualified for that. And you are totally right. They will be given tasks that they have pretty much mastered, and it will be a very repetitive thing for them. They will get bored. They will want more opportunities, but in this position, there's nothing more that I can offer other than that. And then they will end up leaving or being very unhappy, and it will force me to either promote them early, but then that's not exactly what the type of position that I needed, right? Or them leaving and then starting the hiring process all over again. So that is exactly why I wouldn't be excited about hiring an overqualified candidate. Absolutely.
Indeed. When you're a hiring manager and a manager, you also have to, I mean, in obviously good companies, you have to think ahead of career path and what people are going to do on the long term. So that's all those things you have to
Yeah.
consider when you're doing the interview process. It's not just for day one, the task that you have. It's also
Yeah,
in the medium long term, hopefully.
exactly. Last one. I can't believe we were able to cover them all. But last one, number 11. Every org has dysfunctional teams.
Ooh.
Absolutely. Absolutely, they do.
I think that's the perfect one to finish the list, right?
Yeah.
This one, it's funny because again, it goes with sometimes when you kind of think a company as a single entity and you think that everything is synchronized, aligned, and everyone is the same in the company. Well, no, because people are different and management is difficult. There's a lot of complaint, of people who are IC, so individual contributors who are promoted managers. They maybe don't have support, or maybe they don't like to be managers and they'd rather be ICs, but they kind of been forced to do that. And so they don't really like doing it.
Yep.
And then you have completely kind of toxic teams because, like there's like a mismatch between the different people in the team. I mean, people, they're not just a mathematic formula, right? It's hard to get a well-rounded and a good interacting team. So that's why when sometimes people, they are all about names, they kind of, let's say you want absolutely to work at Google and you're like, okay, it's Google, it's fine. Whereas actually in reality, maybe that team is not fine. But you were so kind of blinded by the name that you forgot to check the team. And at the end of the day, and that's why I say a lot to graduate students, although I know it's a hard thing to hear and to follow. And I know I'm going to say it, but I'm not even sure myself how I would have taken this advice back then. But teams matter more than names, because especially when you're going to first start your job, is it really worth getting, disgusted or, starting with a toxic environment just to get a name on your CV? Is it really worth it? And even more than that, sometimes also the industry matters. And for that, I have actually a personal story to tell. Is when I was doing my internship, I did an internship with a friend and we kind of ended up in two different teams. And that was completely random. Honestly, I could have, if that team was accepting me, I would have gone there. Same for my friends. But they were on two different businesses. And so at the end of our internship, one was kind of thriving, which like I was lucky it was mine. And her was really kind of in a bear market. So it really went bad. And I think her manager left. I mean, yeah, a lot of bad things happened. And I was like, whoa, it could have been me. Because again, I didn't check at all like the team environment and I didn't check the context. And those little things, if you can actually maybe plan a little bit ahead or try to have some, drive on where you want to be, that will really make, I would say that will save you from maybe having those bad experiences.
Yeah. How do you recommend people during let's assume that they do their research, but during the interview process, how would you recommend that they try to understand the team dynamic better so they can make a better decision if they're given an offer?
There's one that seems so obvious to me now, but for some reason that wasn't before. Actually, two ways to find out, I think. The first one, you can simply ask, how long have you been in the team? If everyone you meet has been in the team for like 6 months, or maybe it's like a new team. So in that case, okay. But if it was supposed to be a team that was like established and stuff like that, so if everyone's been like just there for 6 months, there must be something. That means the team is not able to keep its members. And that for me is a red flag. Also, if you want to try to feel if the team is cohesive, what you can do is you can actually mention the people you've met before and see the reaction. Because and especially, I guess some people are good at poker face, but honestly, I've seen in conferences when people present together, but they don't like each other, you can feel it, you can see it.
Yeah.
And I've seen that during talks in conferences. So, and that was public in front of so many people. So if it's just like in a one-to-one interview and you ask those little questions, kind of follow-up questions, so just trying to understand more about the context, you can get a sense of how this team works and pulls.
I think that there is a line that ties together all of these 11 points that you made. I think there is this underlying theme that this is an interview process both for the company to understand if you are a good fit, but for you to understand if the company is a good fit. It's a two-way process, and it should be approached that way. It should be approached as a collaboration. As you know, we are partnering right now to see if we are going to be potentially good partners moving forward. And I say partners with air quotes because it's not necessarily a partnership as in business partnership, but it's still somewhat a collaboration, right? So it's the start of a relationship. So you want to make sure that there is a good fit on both sides and it's not a one-sided relationship, because if that happens, it's going to be ugly, it's going to be short-term, and someone is going to end up being disappointed. So I think that that's the kind of the theme that I can see. It's not made out in a point. It's not point 12, but I see that you mention it every once in a while that, it has to be a back and forth.
Yes, especially as a candidate. Again, I'm not saying that you should wait to find that perfect team with the perfect setup, with the perfect, tools, methods. It doesn't exist. But you need to be aware of where you're going and you need to consent. I mean, you could say that actually you don't care being in a team that hates each other, that could be a thing. Or maybe like you need to get some experience, because you have to get a job right now and you need to kind of start kind of gathering this experience. Perfect. But at least you will know it. But the same way, if you go somewhere and there's no career path, there's no training opportunities, it's better to kind of know that before so you won't be disappointed later on. And that's all those little things that sometimes if you know it, that's better because at least you know where you're going into. Whereas if you discover it or if maybe the team has oversold that to you, it's the same thing. There's kind of this kind of, is that those person, are they honest being with me? It's kind of the same point but reversed.
I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're interested in any of the resources we mentioned, all the links are on the episode page of our website, The Industry of